to moderate our next must-do panel, please welcome Research Professor of Science Communication at George Washington University, Anneliese Palmer.
Thank you all. We are really excited to be a part of this next panel. I came to this panel, or this idea of to the idea of food security through the lens of climate change in around 2007. I had been covering climate change almost exclusively as a reporter, but food did not really have a seat at the table. There was a lot of work being done, but it really hadn't entered the public discourse, and that's really when I started writing my book, Hot, Hungry Planet, about the fight to stop a global food crisis in the face of climate change. And so, I'm happy to see that food is part of the discussion today. I think deeply about food and its many roles it has in our world, not only as a critical factor in our health and in public health, as an industry, as a science, as a craft of cooking and bringing people together in our culture. It's also been a political instrument. And so that has been a common thread through much of these talks this week. But in all of this work, there are so many bright spots being done in food and what we need to do to tackle our global food system. And so in our panel, I'm looking at our must-do here. Exactly what we're speaking about is to take a look at what are the actions that we need to urgently achieve a healthy, safe, and secure food system for the global population. And so, I just want to welcome my esteemed colleagues here to the floor. We have, first joining us is Saharah Moon Chapotin. We have Wallace Cheng and Lona Stoll. So thank you. So, we're going to be examining the role of government policies to provide some enabling environment. We'll be hearing about some research and the public-private sector partnerships needed, and then sort of examine some of these large international programs that could maybe bring things together and provide some very granular details that we can add to our must-do discussions that will follow this. And I'm moderating one of those, so you get to see me again. So our first panelist is the Executive Director of the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research, Dr. Saharah Moon Chapotin. She examines the role of the private sector in supporting the transformation of a sustainable agricultural and food system. So what specifically is this role in this the public-private sector partnerships to support the research necessary for producers and others in the food system to achieve this sustainability and our human health goals?
Well, thank you. It's wonderful to be here, and I think you just said it. I think there is an important role for both the public and the private sectors to play in advancing a transformation of our food system. My organization focuses on research, so we bring together public and private players to support the food and agriculture research that producers need, that everybody up and down the value chain in the food and ag sector needs in order to advance that transformation and lead towards a more sustainable outcome.
And so, we want to get right to some points here. So what are some examples that can achieve these actions that are urgently needed? Can you give us some examples? Because we're going to be going into these next sections and we want to start thinking about some specific examples.
Yes. So the history and literature around the investments in agriculture research and the very important impact that can play in the food and ag sector is well known. But just taking the United States as an example, our investments in public agriculture research have declined by about a third since early 2000s, which is very significant, even as other countries like China, Brazil, India are increasing their investments. And so Congress in the United States recognized a need to really bring more of that investment into the public space and formed FAR. And so what I see as the critical role we can play, and I'll share some examples of that, is that by bringing that private sector investment, there's tremendous R&D investment in the private sector, bringing that private sector investment into the public space And through that public-private partnership, investing the private sector to make those research investments that will benefit not just their company, but will generate that public goods research that is needed for producers and other players across the value chain to really transform the agricultural system. Things like bringing new technologies to considering how to reduce enteric methane in cattle, for example, or breeding the new crops that we need in order to deal with a changing climate.
Yeah, so you get to that timeline piece. When I was reporting my book, a lot of I think I included it in one of my first chapters is the need to be able to move quickly, and how that doesn't happen when we're looking at breeding crops or changing breeding animal species. It's how can we get there quickly, and you're saying that through some of these public-private partnerships with stakeholders who can bring more resources to the table, or what exactly is that quality?
Sure. Well, I was thinking about the timeline question, and I was like, well, the answer is yesterday. This needed to happen already, and so there's not some long-term plan we can set up to do this. We need to do it right now. And yes, additional resources are critical, but it's not just putting more money into it. It's how we work, and it's leveraging. What I love about bringing the private sector into partnerships is, sure, you can bring those additional resources, and that's so critical, but it's also leveraging the ability of the private sector to reach producers, to reach stakeholders. They have these companies that have incredible global reach. And if you can bring them on board and engage them in transforming the agriculture system, you can have so much more power. I mean, I'll just take an extra second to say that I think we often malign the food and agriculture system. It is the root of all our problems. It is broken. We have to fix it. But I think there's tremendous potential for agriculture and food to be the solution. It is so integrated into our lives. If you look across the world, so much of the global population is either in a rural area or engaged in the agriculture sector in some way, that if you can transform the agriculture sector, you can have an outsized impact on just the trajectory of our planet. And so I do just truly, I mean, agriculture fills me with optimism. I do not look out and see it as just doom and gloom. There is so much potential to have an impact on the climate, to have an impact on our health and our well-being, that I think that's where we need to invest.
And I'm glad you say the bright spots here. Yeah, applaud. For me as a journalist covering this issue, that's kind of one of the reasons I turned my lens to writing around agriculture and food security and the food systems, is because I felt that there were some bright spots there worth highlighting. And so, the science behind some of these developments really could provide some good tools for the rest of the world. So our second panelist, and we'll come back to you again, so you're not off the hook completely. So our second panelist is Dr. Wallace Chen, who's a Chinese and Swiss, and Wallace is an economist trained at Oxford and based in Geneva, and he's the head of Impact, Innovation, and Development at the Swiss Foundation on Responsible Leadership Globe Ethics. And so as someone who is an economist and with a humanitarian heart, Wallace focuses on addressing developing countries' food problems. And so, of course, amid the food waste and huge sort of dietary challenges in the global north, Wallace sort of looks at all of these factors maybe put together. I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly, but I know, Wallace, how can we enable government policies for a sustainable food system while also pinpointing the role of markets? And so we haven't quite gotten into that yet, but markets play a big role. So you're bringing that sort of hat to this conversation.
Thank you, Lisa. Allow me to begin by congratulating Global Futures Lab for putting together this wonderful gathering and engaging dialogue. There's no doubt that we need both government and market function to achieve sustainable food systems. We now know must-haves, but the question is, as Peter mentioned in his opening remarks on Tuesday, is how to do it, right? I had the privilege to work with farmers, government in Africa and Asia for over a decade. My observation is that sustainable future is possible if we see from farmers' eyes, okay, to address their challenges and to deliver KPIs. K means knowledge. P is policies. I is innovation. I just want to share a story from from Eric. He is a farmer in Kenya with a family of 8 people. For Eric, the knowledge is lifeblood.
For the Irish and the Puerto Rican. Out of this conflict comes one.
Yeah, for another meeting. Yeah. So because of climate change, soil conditions has changed. The Eric has more difficulties to decide what to plant, how to treat the new crop diseases, for example. According to the statistics of Kenya's Ministry of Agriculture, around 50% of pesticides and fertilizers are misused. It not only cost money, but also damaging health, damaging environment. The second point is policies. Because we need the enabling policies, I think the key is to bridge this last mile, to enhance the urban and rural community connectivities, so that will attract investment, attract entrepreneurs into the rural economy, so that can transform the subsistence farm to a modern economy. Finally, the innovation. From Eric's story, that all thanks to the innovation, he's now actually hold the position as a marketing manager of farms organization in his village, because Kenya initiated a project called 1 Million Farmers on digital platforms, so that through these apps like WeFarm, DigiFarm, the farmers can access this market information, but also via e-commerce, the farmers organization can procure the quality seeds and fertilizers with competitive price, but also can sell their produce to the urban consumers, so that he's not just surviving, he's help the community thrive and also plant seeds for the future next generation. To conclude, I think we need this KPI. Collectively, need to have a farmer-centered approach, so that we can create a foundation upon which that sustainable future is possible. Thank you.
So are you asking or thinking more about the role of sort of technology at the farm level? You know, I think often what we're seeing from the youth, we've got this big discussion this week about this growing youth and this large youth population. You know, they want to go into sort of really modern roles, modern opportunities. And so is that where you're seeing maybe the role of technology at the farm level, that they can sort of bring those two modernized sort of roles together?
Yeah, indeed. This is a crucial question: how to make the modern agriculture and the rural areas more attractive. I think the technology brings opportunity for this tech-savvy, business-savvy youth come back to the rural areas, so reinvigorate the rural economy. I think that is critical. Yeah.
So, before your current role, you worked at the UN World Food Program, sort of including the Food Systems Summit in 2022 and the German Development Institute on issues of food, trade, and digital and sustainability. And so what exactly are the barriers and opportunities here for international cooperation?
Well, there are many opportunities for collaboration, international cooperations in agriculture area. For example, the trade policies, you can improve adopt new regulations to incentivize the imports and exports of sustainable goods. At the regional level, for example, ASEAN, they issued this action plan for food security to combine it together. Actually, there's another, I think the principle for international cooperation, regional cooperation, is to try to solve the real problem. One Nigerian cashew nuts producer told me that he needs to send the cashew nuts thousands of miles away to India to process, then send samples to Europeans to get certificate. This is costly, this is time consuming. Why not these Western African countries come together, saying we put investment together to build processing facilities in West Africa, to get international support to set up internationally recognized food certificate agencies in Africa. That would be a great cooperation, I would say. Thank you.
So yeah, it's that regional integration, sort of this vertical integration of their markets, but also maybe leveling the playing field so that they can get, okay. Lona. So our next panelist is Lona Stoll, who's worked on food systems both in the US and globally. So we've got a very global panel here, but also with knowledge in the US. So Lona has led global food security efforts from the US government, the US Department of Agriculture, and worked alongside Dr. Saharah Moon at the US Agency for International Development, where Lona led the cross-US government efforts to advance an initiative called Feed the Future. And so, Lona, you've managed large programs on agriculture, and we're talking today and all this week about these big shifts. So you've managed these large programs on agriculture, land, and nutrition, and on multi-stakeholder efforts to shift supply chain, the cocoa, tea, and garment industries, and then towards this more human and planetary health and prosperity and abundance sectors. And so as we seek to move towards actions, what are the bright spots out there? What specifically have you seen the kind of progress that demonstrates this speed and urgency to transform the food system and scale up?
Thanks so much, Anneliese, and thanks everybody for being here. I know it's the last day, but I want to pick up on a theme that I think has really come across through many of the panels, which is the focus on short-term profit and direct costs as being one of the foundational things we need to shift in order to really get to the kind of future that we're all working on. And so I want to share 3 bright spots where I think that is shifting in key places today. The first is where, if you look at and pick up on the theme of the choices that companies are making and investors are making, you can see a potential bright spot in the way Danone is starting to look at carbon-adjusted earnings and think about what that means throughout its entire supply chain and the regenerative farming that means needs to be happening at the very ground farm gate level. The second bright spot I'd point to is just this year, a couple of months ago, the ILO put forth new guidelines on decent work living wage in food systems, and there'll be a process over this next year to really put those guidelines into practice that involves governments at the national level, communities within a country, really working together with the private sector to figure out what does it mean to put those guidelines in practice. And the third is in the United States, where you're seeing an increasing recognition of that intersectionality of health and food. If you just look at the direct costs for the United States of food, it's 1.1 trillion. But if you look at the true cost of it, the way we've been talking about this week, it's actually closer to 3 trillion when you take into account the ramifications of poor nutrition in terms of health costs. If you take into account the ramifications of not getting farmers to decent work living wage levels, and therefore the other subsidies that end up being put into place by the government. And so if you start to look at that and connect it together rather than seeing food as one direct cost and health as a separate fragmented cost, you start to get progress in things like food as medicine and integration of nutrition and healthy food practices into our health system, and start to really look at it more holistically. So I do think one of the core challenges we have to think about is how do you shift the governing framework for how we make decisions in the world away from this short-term profit, direct cost mindset. And there's 3 key bright spots that I'd point us to where you can start to see the potential for some of those shifts and the recognition that you have to think about food and agriculture in the context of people's own prosperous livelihoods, in the context of health, like the panel this morning was talking about, and in the context of the short-term risks that are part of the actual business that corporations in the ag sector need to be thinking about.
And that's that sort of risk reduction and that risk and uncertainty piece of it It's something that I think that the business community and the producers are very well aware of, and so how can we speak that language? Okay, and I guess to follow up, I wanted to ask you, we have to think in these systems, right? So that is, moving systems is not easy, but what innovations can you point to that can shift the systems quickly and in the direction that we maybe need here with this panel?
Yeah. Well, I've been thinking, as have many of you, probably a lot about the systemic nature, and even over the course of these 3 days, you can see how much the conversation in one panel relates to then the conversation of another. So I was trying to get it to 3 pithy points, Anneliese, of what are the key system innovation leverage points, but I had to stop at 6. But they aren't an overwhelming 6, so bear with me, but here's the 6. The first is that there is an incredible importance to regulation and guidelines. So I already covered the ILO guidelines on decent work living wage.
ILO, for people who don't
the
know.
International Labor Organization. But there's also really interesting potential bright spots in terms of raising the floor and the ability of regulations to lift up, again, going back to that short-term profit, direct cost mindset, to lift up the floor. So, we've already talked about the European Union's regulations on deforestation and child labor. These can be really critical forcing mechanisms to move the system. The second key point of system innovation is really that reframing of what shareholder value is and what profit really is. And the way, like other panels, including the ones this morning, have talked about, we have to shift that focus. And so you can look at what Danone is doing with carbon adjusted income, other moments of change like that, to just start to say, what does it take to really double down on that source of innovation? The third is using our public levers. And on this, I don't think we've talked enough about these 3 days. So there's a huge amount of investment that's coming from governments. Again, if you go back to the US in terms of hospital food procurement, school food procurement, if you look at the World Food Program and the US Department of Agriculture and everything that's going into global procurement of food to respond to crises, those are places where we can both really make sure we're sending market signals that they are going to be purchasing healthy, nutritious, sustainable food and shift those public dollars now. The other part of the public levers is, of course, subsidies, which we've talked about and have to be part of what changes. The fourth is
subsidies in terms of what? In
subsidies,
those perverse subsidies that support the, okay.
Right. So the fact that part of why cheap food in the US is unhealthy is because of what we're subsidizing, which then makes that food cheaper. So the fourth system innovation is shifting power and voice. And this has come up, but is really key for us to grapple with at scale. How do you create the demand for change and lift the voice of those small scale producers? And my bright spot here would be, when you look across 50 years of global development, I do think there's a couple things that stand out that work and are scaling. And one of them is village savings and loans associations, so cooperatives and the women-led versions of those that right now there are literally millions of women that are part of, and you can see how they're starting to change dialogues and change power within countries. So making sure that we are really building in those voices and investing in the structures that let them have a greater voice in their own countries. Fifth one is coalitions. So Canopy, we heard from Canopy yesterday, what a compelling example of pre-competitive supply chain actors coming together to shift. It's hard to be the only one shifting, but if it's you and the 5 other biggest companies all shifting together, it's a lot easier. So how do you really foster those coalitions that can start to really collectively bring the power to shift the system? And the last one is gender. When I, for years, worked over gender programs at various agencies in the US government, I wished I had the data to show why gender transformation and not just gender mainstreaming was important. Well, thanks to investments by the Gates Foundation, there are now studies that show that gender transformative programming gives you a 5-to-1 cost-benefit ratio, returns 410% on the dollar. And so we need to stop accepting that any programming in the agricultural space is not building in gender transformation. Back over to you.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yes. And having that gender piece, it's really interesting that you bring this up, because as I was writing my book, I thought I was writing a book about food security and climate change, but I ended up writing a book about women's empowerment and girls' education as well. So that access to finance, that access to resources, the ability to be able to invest and transform what the food needs they have for their own localized community has been, I've seen it on the ground play out, and that's sort of the role that I take as a journalist, is to ground truth some of these. We're going to just go through some lightning rounds here for some answers around the must-dos. So the must-dos we have related to this panel, we must enable a planetary health diet for all. The must-do is increasing sustainable development in the agriculture and food sector, secure and strengthen the resilience of agricultural supply chains, and then ensure socially responsible practices across land and sea agriculture. So among these set of must-dos, Sarah Moon, do you have, which one would you consider most crucial for achieving this must-have goal?
I don't know that you can boil it down to just one.
Good.
But I think there's one in there around accelerating the transition or the development. I'm forgetting how it's worded, but fundamentally we do need to transform our food system and make it both more sustainable and also ensure that it delivers the food that we need to live a healthy diet. So that's connected back to the first one, of course. So these are interrelated.
And would you say, there are key stakeholders that come to mind, and potentially some immediate actions that would be in this 1 to 5 year time span?
Yeah, so I'll come back to my theme, which is speaking of the role of the private sector, which, the food and agriculture space is inherently the private sector. Farmers are private entities too. And I think one of the must-dos is really thinking about how to leverage the tremendous resources that are in the private sector and incentivize those to be spent, particularly the R&D resources, to be spent in a way that delivers the solutions, the technologies, the know-how, the knowledge that producers need, that others in the value chain need in order to transform systems. And I can share an example of something I mentioned earlier, thinking about the enteric methane emissions from cattle as a huge contributor to climate change. And when you think about consumers want more sustainable food, they want food that's nutritious and healthy. Most consumers do not have the option to go to the grocery store and look at the various options and say, well, I'm going to pick this one because it's more sustainable, even though it costs 3 times as much. They simply don't have the purchasing power or the ability to make those choices and to spend more on food than they already do across, not just in the United States, but across the world. And so how can we incentivize the companies to make the investments they need to support the producers in adopting the technologies and solutions that will deliver more sustainable, more nutritious food in a way that doesn't cut into the producer's bottom line, so allows them to deliver that food to companies in a way that allows companies to deliver food to consumers without changing the cost. So it really comes down to what's the research, and I think the R&D effort is essential to this, because there's a lot, someone said earlier, we've got the science. Well, we do have the science, but we need to adapt that science to each producer's unique situation. You're growing cattle in a feedlot, you're grazing cattle, you're a pastoralist in Africa. Every producer's situation is a little bit different, and there's not a one-size-fits-all solution to reducing enteric methane, for example. We need to bring genetic approaches to the table. We need to bring feed approaches. We need to bring better management approaches. And so one of the consortia that my organization has launched is the Greener Cattle Initiative, which does just that. It brings the animal science companies, Gina Salenko, it brings the food companies, JBS, the dairy management folks, producers, all up and down the value chain from the food companies to the producers together to put their resources together and de-risk that investment. No one company wants to have to make the investment to figure out how to make cattle burp less. That's too big of a problem. But by bringing all the players together and pooling their resources and generating something that's essentially in the public good, they can de-risk that investment and really affect that transformational change. And I think on the timeline question, again, it has to happen right now. It's already happening, but we need to continue to ensure the resources are there.
Thank you. Wallace, any other must-dos that stand out for you? I know they all are important that we will be tackling, but is there one that stands out to you, and especially with an example of maybe something that has an immediate action within the next 5 years?
I would highlight maybe 2 points. One is digitalization, to leverage digital technologies, enabled business models to help farmers to improve access to market, improve access to information, to finance. So these digital solutions can happen pre-farming, on farming, and also after farming. The second one I think is very important for developing countries is to really enhance regional cooperation, because this agriculture is a special sector that you need to reach certain economies of scales to really have a transformative effects from subsistence farming, small farming, to more sustainable agribusiness. One example I want to share is that in Southeast Asia, Grow Asia is a very innovative approach. Is a kind of brainchild of ASEAN Secretary of World Economic Forum. Take approach with farmer-centered, government-led, community-led, and also market-driven. Bring investors, agri-tech, and farmers' communities together to really drive a very good impact on the local food system. Thank you.
Lona.
Same question?
Yes.
All right, so I think I would say it's a moment for us to send a signal that's like an advanced market commitment that changed the reality for various vaccines around the world, and where you had, even with digital finance, you had the Better Than Cash Alliance, right, that created a clear market signal that if you put these systems in place, someone will buy it. I think we have to do something similar around regenerative, sustainable agriculture, and think about how do we signal that we will not, whether it's a UN food organization or a government, that we're not going to buy food that's not regenerative and not actually creating livable, decent work for people. And we can't make that shift overnight, or we'll leave all of the, a lot of producers behind who can't meet those standards on their own. But we should be really clear that that's the direction we're moving to, and here are the targets that are going to get us there. And if we can do that with enough of a purchasing power behind it, it will provide a real catalyst signal. And there are some key opportunities to then put that into practice. So you have, like I mentioned, these national dialogues that will be taking place around the ILO guidelines on decent work, living wage. Those are really important spaces that can ground the voice and participation of communities and producers in the right way, alongside the government stakeholders and ag companies. So the process to put those guidelines in place, and the countries that are willing to lead in doing so, are key windows of opportunity for us. As well as to really just double down on the pieces that have come up over the last 2 days around true cost accounting for food, and getting away from accepting short-term profit for agricultural companies as the marker for how they should be thinking about delivering value.
So as we wrap it up here, I wanted to give each of you a minute or 30 seconds really to sum up. Is there something here within your sector, and what are the barriers, maybe opportunities in your sector to the advancement of some of these must-dos? What do you see are the opportunities or the barriers in your sector?
I'll just come back to the science. I think there's tremendous potential to really tap into the power of science, and in particular to global collaborations, to bring the best of science from across the world onto this challenge.
And to bring the science, how to inform decision making, to inform?
To bring solutions to the fore. I think we know a lot about biology and agricultural systems that we haven't applied at the level of, at the place space. So a farmer on their farm, how do they have the access, the information they need to make the right decisions? This regenerative practice here will work differently over there. So how can they know what will work on their farm so they can deliver? Awesome. Wallace.
Well, for me, I think I think leadership is very important at a national level and community level. To these real leaders take a holistic approach to encompass the different knowledges, policies, enabling the functioning market, and promote innovation.
And Lona.
So I think the key challenge for us is actually communications. I'm just going to frame it in that way, to say that as long as this feels like it's a win-lose, that a whole bunch of established, powerful actors have to lose in order for this change to happen, it's going to be hard. To Saharah's point on, are we just saying the whole ag system is so broken that it's failed and we have to start over, or are we saying we have to think about what success is in a different way and really help the sector say, we're not just asking you for and measuring your success as short-term profit. But actually, even if you just look out, we have the blessing of the bad news that it now feels like it's not a long-term thing, but it's a 2-year thing, it's a 1-year thing to say, what are the risks to my supply chain that are social and that are environmental? And if we can really make it a clear win that these companies work and shift in this way, and that our own governments, we demand that they also use our own taxpayer dollars to purchase in this way, then we can make it a win-win rather than a win-lose, where people feel threatened and are fighting the change. And I think that's the core challenge for us.
So solutions, communication, and really being able to get these points across along from many levels. So, well, thank you so much, and please thank my panelists here. Look forward to following the conversation in our breakouts.